The church bells tolled, but they weren't ringing for Evan Carter. He stood outside the white-steepled chapel in Cold Spring, New York, his breath visible in the crisp October air, his heart pounding like a war drum. They'd banned him from the wedding, his own brother's wedding, because of who he loved. Evan's fingers tightened around the crumpled invitation in his pocket, the one he'd received before the family found out about Javier. The words, "You're no longer welcome," still burned in his mind, spoken by his mother in a phone call that felt like a blade through his chest. He wasn't here to crash the wedding. He just needed to see Caleb one last time, to know his brother was happy, even if it meant watching from the shadows. Javier's hand grazed his shoulder, warm and steady. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice low, carrying the faint lilt of his Puerto Rican heritage. Javier Morales, 32, stood a head taller than Evan, his sharp jawline softened by the concern in his deep brown eyes. He'd driven 3 hours from Brooklyn to be here, not because he wanted to fight Evan's family, but because he couldn't let Evan face this alone. "I'm not here to make a scene," Evan muttered, his voice cracking. At 28, he still had the boyish charm that made people trust him. Tousled dark hair, freckles dusting his cheeks. But today, his green eyes were stormy with hurt. I need to see him walk down that aisle. Then I'll go." Javier's lips pressed into a thin line, but he nodded. He knew what this meant to Evan. The Carter family was old money, their roots tangled deep in the Hudson Valley's history. Caleb, Evan's older brother, was their golden child, the one who followed the rules, the one marrying Abigail Thornton today in a ceremony that screamed tradition. Evan, on the other hand, had always been the wild card, the artist who dared to love openly, even when it cost him everything. They stood behind a row of ancient oak trees, just out of sight from the church's manicured lawn where guests in tailored suits and pastel dresses mingled. The organ music swelled, signaling the start of the ceremony. Evan's heart lurched. He pictured Caleb in his tuxedo, standing at the altar, his broad shoulders squared, his blonde hair catching the stained glass light. Caleb, who'd once promised to always have his back. "Do you think he'll even notice I'm not there?" Evan whispered, more to himself than to Javier. Javier's hand slid down to Evan's, squeezing gently. "He'll notice. He's your brother." But doubt gnawed at Evan. 2 years ago, when he'd come out to his family, Caleb had been the only one who didn't turn away immediately. He'd hugged Evan, said, "You're still my little brother." But then the pressure came, family expectations, their mother's icy disapproval, their father's silence. Caleb stopped calling, stopped texting, and when the wedding invitations went out, Evan's was rescinded. The church doors closed with a heavy thud, sealing the guests inside. Evan's chest tightened. He could leave now, slip away before anyone saw him. But his feet wouldn't move. "Let's go closer," Javier said, his voice firm but gentle. "You deserve to be here, even if they don't see it." Evan hesitated, then nodded. They crept along the tree line, stopping at a low stone wall that offered a view of the church's side windows. Through the glass, Evan caught a glimpse of the altar. Caleb stood there, tall and polished, his face unreadable. Abigail, in a flowing white gown, looked radiant, her smile practiced but genuine. The priest's voice carried faintly, speaking of love and commitment. Evan's throat burned. He wanted to be happy for Caleb, but the rejection stung too deeply. "I should have known," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe Caleb would fight for me." Javier's arm wrapped around him, pulling him close. "You're enough, Evan. You've always been enough. The words were a lifeline, but they couldn't drown out the ache. Evan leaned into Javier, drawing strength from his warmth. They'd met a year ago at a Brooklyn art gallery, where Evan's paintings, vivid, emotional landscapes, had caught Javier's eye. Javier, a social worker with a knack for seeing through people's walls, had seen Evan's pain even then. Their first date was coffee in Williamsburg, their second a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge at midnight. By their third, Evan knew he was falling in love. Now, standing outside a church that had rejected him, Evan felt that love like an anchor. But it didn't erase the question that haunted him. Why wasn't I enough for my family? Inside, the ceremony continued. The priest's voice rose, and the guests stood. Evan's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment Caleb would say his vows. But then, something shifted. Caleb's head turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. Evan froze, half hidden by the wall. Could Caleb see him? Did he know? Javier's grip tightened. "He's looking for you," he whispered. Evan's heart skipped. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe Caleb regretted it. Maybe he'd walk out, find Evan, and make things right. But then Caleb turned back to Abigail, his shoulders relaxing, and the moment passed. Evan's hope crumbled. "Let's go," he said, his voice hollow. "I can't do this." But before they could move, a shout broke the silence. "Evan!" It was Caleb's voice, raw and desperate, echoing from the church doors. Evan spun around, his breath catching. The doors were open, and Caleb stood there, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his face flushed with something unreadable. Anger, regret, or both. The guests gasped, heads turning. Abigail's smile faltered, and Evan, rooted to the spot, felt the world tilt. "What are you doing?" Javier hissed, pulling Evan back. "He's coming this way." Caleb broke into a run, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd, the priest's confused calls. He vaulted the low wall, his polished shoes sinking into the grass. "Evan!" he called again, his voice cracking. Evan's heart thundered. He stepped forward, out of Javier's grip, meeting his brother halfway. "Caleb, what?" "I couldn't do it," Caleb said, breathless. His blue eyes, so like their father's, were wide with emotion. "I couldn't stand there and pretend everything was fine without you." The words hit Evan like a tidal wave. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Behind Caleb, the church doors stayed open, the crowd watching in stunned silence. Abigail stood at the altar, her hands clasped tightly, her expression unreadable. "Caleb, you're getting married," Evan managed, his voice shaking. "You don't have to." "No," Caleb cut him off. "I should have fought for you. I should have told Mom and Dad to go to hell. You're my brother, Evan. I don't care who you love. I care that you're here." Tears stung Evan's eyes. He wanted to believe it, but years of rejection made him wary. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why let them kick me out?" Caleb's face crumpled. "I was scared. I thought I could keep the peace. But I was wrong." He reached out, gripping Evan's shoulders. "I'm so sorry." Javier stepped closer, his presence a quiet strength. "Evan, you don't have to forgive him right now," he said softly. "But he's here. That's a start." Evan looked between Javier and Caleb, his heart torn between pain and hope. The church, the guests, the weight of tradition. It all faded. All that mattered was this moment, this fragile chance to rebuild what had been broken. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," Evan said, his voice barely steady. "But I want to." Caleb nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll earn it back. I promise." Behind them, Abigail stepped out of the church, her gown catching the sunlight. She didn't look angry, only curious. "Caleb?" she called, her voice calm but firm. "What's going on?" Caleb turned, his expression torn. He loved Abigail, he'd told Evan as much 100 times. But he'd left her at the altar, chasing after his brother. The weight of that choice hung in the air. Evan's heart raced. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Caleb, Abigail, and the family they'd all been trying to hold together. "I need to talk to her," Caleb said, his voice low. "But I'm not leaving you again, Evan. Not ever." As Caleb walked back toward Abigail, Evan felt Javier's hand slip into his. The world was still spinning, but for the first time in years, Evan didn't feel alone. The autumn sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the church lawn as Caleb approached Abigail. Evan watched, his chest tight, Javier's hand still anchoring him. The crowd inside the church had spilled out now, their murmurs a low hum of confusion and judgment. Abigail stood poised, her veil fluttering in the breeze, but her eyes were sharp, searching Caleb's face. "Caleb, what's happening?" she asked again, her voice steady but laced with something fragile. At 29, Abigail Thornton was striking tall, with auburn hair pinned elegantly and hazel eyes that missed nothing. She'd grown up in the same elite circles as the Carters, trained to navigate their world of appearances, but there was a warmth to her that Evan had always liked. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveling. "Abby, I'm sorry. I couldn't go through with it, not like this." Her brow furrowed. "Not like what?" "Caleb, you ran out in the middle of our vows." Evan's stomach twisted. He felt like an intruder, the cause of this chaos. He wanted to step forward, to explain, but Javier's gentle squeeze kept him grounded. "Let him handle it," Javier whispered. Caleb took a shaky breath. "It's Evan, my brother. They banned him from the wedding because he's gay, because he's with Javier. I didn't fight for him, Abby. I let my family push him away, and I hate myself for it." Abigail's gaze flicked to Evan, then to Javier, standing protectively at his side. Her expression softened, but there was a flicker of hurt in her eyes. "You didn't tell me," she said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me they did that?" "I thought I could fix it later," Caleb admitted, his voice raw. "I thought if I kept the peace, if I followed through with the wedding, I could make everyone happy. But I was wrong. I can't marry you today. Not when my brother's standing out here, excluded from our family." The words hung heavy in the air. Evan's throat tightened. He'd spent so long feeling like the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Hearing Caleb choose him, choose their bond over tradition, felt surreal. Abigail's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at Evan again, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Evan braced for anger, for blame, but instead, she gave him a small, sad smile. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I'm sorry, Evan." "You don't have to apologize," Evan said quickly, stepping forward. "This isn't your fault. I didn't want to ruin your day." "You didn't," she said, her voice firm now. "If anyone's ruining this, it's your parents." She turned to Caleb, her expression hardening. "Why didn't you tell me they banned him? I would have fought for him too." Caleb looked stricken. "I didn't want to drag you into it. My mom. She made it clear Evan wasn't welcome, and I didn't push back hard enough." Abigail's eyes narrowed. "Your mom doesn't get to decide who's family." She turned to Evan, her voice softening again. "You should be here, Evan. You're Caleb's brother. That matters more than any of their rules." Evan's heart swelled, but before he could respond, A sharp voice cut through the moment. Caleb Michael Carter, what is the meaning of this? Mrs. Eleanor Carter, 60, strode across the lawn, her tailored navy dress impeccable, her graying blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon. Her blue eyes, so like Caleb's, were icy with disapproval. Behind her, Mr. Richard Carter, 62, followed, his face a mask of stoic silence. Evan froze. He hadn't seen his parents in over a year, not since the disastrous dinner where he'd introduced Javier. His mother's words from that night still echoed, "You're choosing this lifestyle over your family." "Mom, stop," Caleb said, stepping in front of Evan. "This isn't right. You can't keep Evan out because of who he is." Eleanor's lips thinned. "This is my son's wedding, Caleb. We will not have it disrupted by this." Her gaze flicked to Javier, then back to Evan, her disgust thinly veiled. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You made your choices, Evan. You knew what it would cost." "Enough," Caleb snapped, his voice louder than Evan had ever heard it. "Evan's my brother. If he's not welcome, then I'm not doing this." The crowd gasped, the sound rippling through the guests. Richard stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Caleb, think about what you're saying. This is your future." "My future includes my brother," Caleb said, unwavering. He turned to Abigail. "Abby, I love you, but I can't start our life together with this hanging over us." Abigail's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "I understand," she said softly. "I don't want a wedding that tears your family apart." Eleanor's face reddened. "You're throwing away everything for him?" she demanded, pointing at Evan. "After all we've done for you?" Caleb stood taller. "What you've done is push Evan away. I'm done letting you control this family." The words hit like a thunderclap. Evan's heart raced, torn between pride and fear. Caleb was risking everything. His relationship with their parents, his wedding, his place in their world. For him. Javier leaned close, his voice a whisper. "He's fighting for you, Evan. Let him." Evan nodded, tears blurring his vision. He wanted to believe this could change things, but the weight of his family's rejection still pressed down on him. Abigail stepped forward, placing a hand on Caleb's arm. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "All of us, but not here." She glanced at the crowd, then at Eleanor. "This isn't the place for this." Caleb nodded, his expression resolute. "You're right. Let's go somewhere private." He turned to Evan. "You're coming with us. You're part of this." Evan's breath caught. For the first time in years, he felt seen by his brother. He glanced at Javier, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Okay," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. As they walked away from the church, the crowd parting to let them through, Evan felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. His mother's glare burned into his back, but Caleb's presence beside him was a shield. Javier's hand in his was a promise. They reached a quiet corner of the church grounds, a small garden tucked behind a stone wall. Abigail sat on a bench, her gown pooling around her like a cloud. Caleb stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Evan and Javier sat across from them, the tension thick enough to choke on. "I don't want to lose you," Caleb said to Abigail, his voice low, "but I can't lose Evan either. I've already let him down too many times." Abigail nodded, her eyes steady. "I don't want to lose you either, but I need to know we're building something real, something that includes everyone who matters to you." Evan's heart ached. He admired Abigail's strength, her willingness to stand up to the Carters' rigid world. But he also saw the pain in her eyes, the weight of a wedding unraveling. "I'm sorry," Evan said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to cause this." "You didn't," Abigail said firmly. "This is about your family's choices, not yours." Javier's hand tightened around Evan's. "You're not the problem here," he said softly. "You never were." Caleb looked at Evan, his eyes full of regret. "I should have stood up for you sooner. I'm doing it now, whatever it takes." The garden was silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Evan felt the weight of the moment, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something from the ashes of this day. But then footsteps approached, and Eleanor's voice cut through the quiet. "This is far from over," she said, her tone cold as steel. Eleanor Carter stood at the edge of the garden, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and betrayal. The late afternoon light cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look older, more severe. Behind her, Richard lingered, his silence louder than any words. The guests had retreated to the church, but their whispers carried on the wind, a chorus of judgment that made Evan's skin prickle. "Caleb, you're making a mistake," Eleanor said, her voice low but venomous. "You're throwing away your future, your family's legacy. For this?" Her gaze flicked to Evan, then Javier, her disdain unmistakable. Evan's chest tightened, the familiar sting of his mother's rejection cutting deeper than he'd expected. He wanted to shrink away, to disappear, but Javier's steady presence beside him kept him grounded. Caleb stepped forward, his jaw set. "The mistake was letting you control us for so long," he said. "Evan's my brother. If you can't accept him, you're the one throwing away this family." Eleanor's eyes widened, her composure cracking. "How dare you speak to me like that? After everything we've given you." "Given me?" Caleb's voice rose, raw with emotion. "You gave me expectations, Mom. Rules. A life I didn't choose. But Evan? He's never asked me to be anything but myself." Abigail stood, her gown rustling as she moved to Caleb's side. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, this isn't about your legacy. It's about love, family. If you can't see that, you're the one missing out." Evan's heart pounded. He'd never expected Abigail to stand up to his mother like this. She'd always been the perfect daughter-in-law-to-be, polished and diplomatic. But now, her hazel eyes burned with conviction, and Evan felt a surge of gratitude. Eleanor's lips trembled, but she didn't back down. "Abigail, you don't understand. This is about tradition, about what's right." "What's right?" Javier spoke for the first time, his voice calm but edged with steel. "What's right is letting people love who they love. Evan's not hurting anyone. He's your son. Why isn't that enough?" Eleanor's gaze snapped to Javier, her expression icy. "You don't belong in this conversation. You're not family. Neither are you if you keep pushing Evan away." Caleb shot back. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped behind his back. "Caleb, let's not do this here," he said, his voice low. "We can talk later, privately." "No," Caleb said, his tone unyielding. "We're doing this now, because I'm done pretending everything's fine. I'm done letting you hurt Evan." Evan's throat burned. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the weight of the moment silenced him. He looked at Caleb, seeing the brother who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd snuck him extra cookies at family dinners, who'd once promised they'd always stick together. That brother was here now, fighting for him. Eleanor's face hardened. "If you choose this path, Caleb, you're choosing him over us." over everything. Then I choose Evan, Caleb said without hesitation. The garden fell silent, the weight of Caleb's words settling over them like a storm breaking. Evan's eyes stung with tears. He'd spent so long feeling like the outcast, the one who didn't belong. But now Caleb was standing with him, against their parents, against the world they'd been raised in. Abigail took Caleb's hand, her expression soft but resolute. I choose Evan too, she said quietly. And I choose you, Caleb, but only if we're building a family that's honest. That's real. Eleanor's face paled. Abigail, you can't be serious. You're throwing away your future for this nonsense. It's not nonsense, Abigail said, her voice steady. It's love. And if you can't understand that, I feel sorry for you. Richard finally spoke, his voice gruff. Enough. Everyone just calm down. We can work this out. But Evan saw the doubt in his father's eyes, the same doubt he'd seen when he came out. Richard had never outright rejected him, but his silence had been its own kind of betrayal. I don't think we can, Evan said, his voice quiet but firm. He stepped forward, meeting his mother's gaze. You've made it clear I'm not welcome, but I'm done begging for your acceptance. I have Javier. I have Caleb. I have people who love me for who I am. Javier's hand found his, a silent promise. Evan drew strength from it, from the man who'd seen him at his lowest and never looked away. Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she didn't soften. You'll regret this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Both of you. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the stone path. Richard hesitated, then followed, his shoulders slumped. The garden felt emptier without them, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Evan exhaled, his breath shaky. I didn't think it would hurt this much, he admitted, his voice breaking. Caleb pulled him into a hug, fierce and unyielding. I'm so sorry, Evan. I should have done this years ago. Evan clung to him, tears spilling over. You're doing it now. That's what matters. Abigail watched them, her expression soft. We're going to figure this out, she said. Together. Javier nodded, his eyes warm. You've got a family right here, Evan. We're not going anywhere. The four of them stood in the garden, the church looming in the distance, its bells silent now. The guests were still there, waiting, whispering, but they felt far away. This moment belonged to Evan, Caleb, Abigail, and Javier, a new family, forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice. Let's get out of here, Caleb said, his voice steadier now. We need to talk, really talk, away from all this. Abigail nodded. There's a diner in town. It's quiet. We can regroup there. Evan hesitated, glancing at the church. Part of him wanted to storm back inside, to confront every guest who'd stood by while he was banned. But another part, the stronger part, knew he didn't need their approval. Not anymore. Okay, he said, his voice soft but certain. Let's go. They walked to Javier's car, a beat-up old sedan that had carried them through countless late-night drives. As they drove away from the church, the tension in Evan's chest began to ease. The road stretched ahead, winding through the golden hills of Cold Spring, and for the first time in years, Evan felt like he was moving toward something, not running away. The diner was a small, cozy spot called Rosie's, its neon sign flickering in the dusk. They slid into a booth, the vinyl seats creaking under them. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, took their orders. Coffee for Javier, tea for Abigail, a milkshake for Evan, and a burger for Caleb, who hadn't eaten all day. As the food arrived, Caleb leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I don't know what happens next, he admitted, but I know I'm not going back to how things were. Evan, you're my brother. I want you in my life, really in it. Evan's heart swelled. I want that too, he said. But what about the wedding? Abby, you didn't sign up for this. Abigail smiled, a little weary but genuine. I signed up for Caleb, and Caleb comes with you. I'm okay with that. Javier chuckled softly. You're a good one, Abigail. She laughed, the sound breaking the tension. I try, but seriously, we need a plan. Your parents aren't going to let this go, Caleb. Caleb's face darkened. I know, but I'm done letting them dictate my life. Or Evan's. Evan looked around the table at the 3 people who'd chosen him today. It wasn't the family he'd been born into, but it was the one he wanted, the one he'd fight for. As the conversation turned to lighter things, Javier's stories from work, Abigail's love for old jazz records, Evan felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he wasn't walking it alone. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a warm glow over the booth where Evan, Javier, Caleb, and Abigail sat. The clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation filled the air, grounding Evan in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time all day, he felt like he could breathe. Caleb took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. I keep thinking about what Mom said, he admitted, about throwing away the family legacy. It's like she thinks love is a transaction, something you trade for status. Abigail reached for his hand, her engagement ring catching the light. It's not, she said softly. Love is messy and hard and worth it. You showed that today, Caleb. Evan watched them, a pang of guilt twisting in his chest. I still feel like I ruined your wedding, he said quietly. You were supposed to be celebrating, not dealing with this. Caleb shook his head. You didn't ruin anything. I made a choice, and I'd make it again. Javier's hand rested on Evan's knee under the table, a quiet reminder of his presence. You're not responsible for their reactions, he said. You showed up to support your brother. That's more than most people would do. Evan nodded, but the weight of the day still lingered. He sipped his milkshake, the sweetness grounding him. I keep wondering if I could have done something differently. If I'd stayed quiet, maybe. No. Caleb cut him off, his voice firm. Don't do that. You didn't cause this. Mom and Dad did. They made their choices, and now they have to live with them. Abigail leaned forward, her eyes bright with determination. We can still have a wedding, you know? Not today, not like this, but something real. Something that includes everyone. She glanced at Evan, her smile warm. Especially you. Evan's heart lifted, but doubt crept in. You think that's possible? After today? I know it is, Abigail said. We'll do it our way. No guest lists dictated by your parents. No rules about who's allowed to love who. Caleb grinned, the first real smile Evan had seen from him all day. A wedding where Evan can bring Javier as his +1. Where we all get to be ourselves. Javier laughed, his deep voice filling the booth. I'm in, but only if there's better music than that church organ. Evan chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing. For a moment, they were just 4 people in a diner, planning a future that felt possible. But the moment was fleeting. The door to Rosie's swung open, and Evan's stomach dropped as he saw his father step inside. Richard Carter looked out of place in the diner, his tailored suit clashing with the worn linoleum floor. His face was unreadable, but his eyes locked on their booth. Evan braced himself, expecting another lecture, another plea to keep the peace. Caleb, Richard said, his voice low as he approached. We need to talk. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, but Evan stays. Richard's gaze flicked to Evan, then to Javier. For a moment, Evan thought he saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it came. This is a family matter, Richard said. Evan is family, Caleb said, his tone unyielding. So is Javier and Abigail. If you want to talk, you talk to all of us. Richard hesitated, then pulled up a chair from a nearby table. He sat, his hands folded tightly. Your mother's upset, he began. She thinks you've humiliated her in front of everyone. She humiliated Evan, Caleb shot back. She banned him from my wedding because of who he loves. That's not family, Dad. That's control. Richard's face tightened, but he didn't argue. I know, he said quietly, surprising them all. I've let her call the shots for too long. I thought it was easier that way, but I was wrong. Evan's breath caught. He'd never heard his father admit to being wrong. Not once in his life. Richard had always been the silent partner, letting Eleanor's will shape the family. I didn't stand up for you, Evan, Richard continued, his voice heavy. I should have. When you told us about Javier, I didn't know how to handle it. I failed you. The words hit Evan harder than he expected. He'd spent so long craving his father's approval, his acknowledgement. Now, hearing it, he didn't know how to respond. Why now? Evan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why say this after everything? Richard's eyes met his, and for the first time, Evan saw vulnerability there. Because I saw Caleb run out of that church today. I saw him choose you, and I realized I don't want to lose both my sons. The table fell silent. Abigail's hand tightened around Caleb's. Javier's thumb brushed Evan's knuckles, a silent anchor. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Evan said, his voice shaking. But I want to try. Richard nodded, his expression weary but hopeful. That's more than I deserve. Caleb leaned forward, his voice softer now. Dad, if you mean this, you need to talk to Mom. She's the one driving this wedge. I know, Richard said. I'll try, but she's stubborn. Abigail snorted softly. That's an understatement. The table shared a small, tentative laugh, the tension breaking just enough to let them breathe. Richard stood, smoothing his jacket. I'll talk to her, but for now I'm glad you're all here. Together. As he left, Evan felt a strange mix of emotions. Hope, fear, and something like relief. His father's words didn't erase the years of silence, but they were a start. The conversation shifted, lighter now, as they planned what came next. Caleb and Abigail talked about a new wedding, one they'd planned themselves, free from the Carters' expectations. Javier suggested a venue in Brooklyn, somewhere vibrant and inclusive. Evan listened, his heart full, imagining a day where he could stand beside his brother, not as an outcast, but as family. But as the night wore on, Evan's thoughts drifted back to his mother. Eleanor's anger, her refusal to bend. It loomed like a storm on the horizon. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. We'll face her together, Javier said, reading his mind. You're not alone in this. Evan nodded, drawing strength from the people around him. The diner felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could rebuild what had been broken. But he knew the real test was coming. As they left Rosie's, the stars bright overhead, Evan felt a flicker of something new. Resolve. He'd spent so long running from his family's rejection. But now, with Caleb, Abigail, and Javier by his side, he was ready to fight for his place. The next morning, Evan woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains of their Airbnb, a cozy cabin just outside Cold Spring. Javier was still asleep beside him, his breathing steady, one arm draped across Evan's chest. For a moment, Evan let himself linger in the quiet, the warmth of Javier's presence a reminder that he wasn't alone. But the events of yesterday crashed back. The church, Caleb's defiance, their mother's anger, their father's unexpected apology, felt like a dream, too raw and real to process. Evan slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Javier, and stepped onto the porch. The Hudson Valley stretched out before him, golden hills rolling under a pale sky. He wanted to paint this moment, to capture the hope and uncertainty swirling inside him. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A text from Caleb. "Meet me at the park by the river. 10 a.m. Abby's coming too." Evan's heart quickened. He didn't know what Caleb wanted to say, but the fact that he was reaching out so soon felt like a lifeline. He typed a quick reply, "I'll be there," and went back inside to wake Javier. By 10, they were at the riverfront park, a quiet stretch of green along the Hudson. Caleb and Abigail were already there, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. Caleb looked tired, his blonde hair mussed, but his smile was warm. Abigail, in jeans and a sweater, looked more relaxed than she had in her wedding gown, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. "Thanks for coming," Caleb said as Evan and Javier approached. "I didn't want to wait to talk." Evan nodded, his throat tight. "What's next?" Caleb glanced at Abigail, who gave him an encouraging nod. "We're postponing the wedding," he said. "Not canceling it, but we're doing it our way. Somewhere new with people who matter. And you're not just invited, Evan, you're part of it. Best man if you'll have it." Evan's breath caught. "Best man?" "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have asked you from the start. I'm asking now." Tears stung Evan's eyes. He'd never imagined standing beside Caleb at his wedding, not after everything. "I'd love to," he said, his voice breaking. Abigail smiled, her eyes bright. "And Javier, you're on the guest list. No +1 nonsense, your family." Javier grinned, his hand finding Evan's. "Appreciated. I'll bring my best dance moves." They laughed, the sound carrying over the river. For a moment it felt like the world was theirs, a future they could shape together. But Evan's thoughts drifted to their parents, to the unresolved tension waiting back at home. "Have you heard from Mom?" Evan asked, his voice quieter now. Caleb's smile faded. "Not yet. Dad called last night, said he's trying to talk to her. But you know how she is." Evan nodded. Eleanor Carter was a force of nature, unyielding in her beliefs. He wanted to hope she'd come around, but he wasn't naive enough to expect it. "She'll have to deal with it," Abigail said, her voice firm. "We're not bending to her rules anymore. This is our family now, yours, mine, Caleb's, Javier's." Evan's heart swelled. He looked at the three of them. Caleb, his brother who'd fought for him. Abigail, who'd chosen love over tradition. Javier, who'd never wavered. This was the family he'd always wanted. The one he'd painted in his mind late at night when the world felt too heavy. "I don't know what to say," Evan admitted, his voice soft. "I've spent so long feeling like I didn't belong. But now I do." Caleb pulled him into a hug, fierce and unapologetic. "You always belonged," he said. "I'm just sorry it took me so long to show it." As they pulled apart, Javier's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting. "It's my sister," he said. "She's in town. Wants to meet up." Evan raised an eyebrow. Lucia's here? Javier nodded. Yeah, she's been dying to meet you properly, Evan. And I think maybe this is a good time. Caleb grinned. Bring her to the new wedding. The more, the merrier. Abigail laughed. We're gonna need a bigger venue. They spent the rest of the morning planning, dreaming up a wedding that would be theirs, vibrant, inclusive, free from the weight of tradition. Evan suggested a loft in Brooklyn, with fairy lights and a playlist of jazz and salsa. Javier offered to cook, his Puerto Rican recipes a nod to his heritage. Abigail wanted wildflowers instead of roses, and Caleb insisted on a dance floor where everyone could let loose. As they talked, Evan felt the pieces of his life coming together. The pain of his family's rejection still lingered, but it was overshadowed by the love surrounding him now. He glanced at Javier, whose smile was a quiet promise, and knew he'd found something worth fighting for. Weeks later, the new wedding took shape. They chose a loft in Dumbo, its exposed brick walls glowing under strings of lights. Evan stood beside Caleb as his best man, Javier at his side, Lucia cheering from the crowd. Their parents weren't there. Eleanor had refused, and Richard, though torn, stayed away to keep the peace. But their absence didn't dim the day. Caleb and Abigail said their vows, their voices steady and full of love. Evan's heart swelled as he watched, knowing he was part of this moment. Not an outcast, but a brother, a friend, a family member by choice. When the music started, Javier pulled Evan onto the dance floor, his movements confident and warm. "You good?" he asked, his voice low. Evan nodded, his eyes bright. Better than good. They danced, the world fading around them, until it was just the two of them under the lights. Evan thought of the church, of the moment Caleb ran to him, of the family they'd built from the ashes of rejection. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And as the night stretched on, filled with laughter and music and love, Evan knew one thing for certain. He'd never be banned from this family. Not ever again.